Still learning about PHP objects. In this video, we are going to begin with learning how to clone an object. So this one is pretty simple. All you need to do is say create a new object, and that is fairly simple, more like a variable name. So just give your new object a name, more like a variable. Then you say equals to, then introduce the keyword clone. Yes, then clone will be followed by the object you want to clone, that is the name of the object you are about to clone. So that is fairly simple. To illustrate this, we can have this class test, and within the class specify the property first name. Now, after which we created an object that instantiates this class test. So we now made an attempt to give our property a value, the first name. So now what we simply do was print R for the object so that we can see if the value was actually assigned to the property. And from the right side of the screen, you can see that this worked just fine. So at this point, I could decide to create a new object. So I'm going to create a new object and call it use class 2. Now I'm going to assign it to the former object we had, which was just use class. Fairly simple, eh? You want to try and avoid as much errors as possible. So what we just did here was create a new object and assign it to the former object we had. All right, so at this point now, I now want to say use class 2, which is actually our new object. Now I want to now say for this object, I want the first name for this object to be this value. So I'm saying this new object we have created, I want it to be of this value. Fair enough. So you expect that this should not affect this because this is a new object. But notice what happens when we try to now print the result of our object for the class we already had initially. So I still want to print R for use class itself, not use class 2, use class, the former object we had. So if I save this and refresh this, you notice that the value for first name actually changed. This one here still remains because this is the call for that one. Now we are calling for this same former object that we had, but then the value changes. Why? Because at this point when we created a new object, we just said this object will serve as a reference to this one. That's all. We did not actually clone the object. So we are saying this and this is exactly the same. If you need to actually clone the object, you want to create another instance of that same class, what you need to do is say clone. So we say use class 2 equals clone, note this keyword, then the former object. So we have this object still assigned to this class, but this has become another instance, not the exact instance. Fair enough. So leaving this code just the way it is, if I save this and I refresh this, you will notice that the first name remains the same. So the fact that we have changed the property first name here for the new class does not affect this object anymore. I hope this is not confusing. So you need to just try and get the idea here. So what we did here was clone the object, and what we did here was change the property value for the new object. Let me just make sure this is correct. And what we did here was what we did here. Fair enough, easy peasy. So if at this point now I need to actually access this new value, then I will need to call this new object. So print R for the new object, save this, refresh this, you notice this comes out for the new object. So that is how easy it is for us to clone a new object. Get the idea here. The idea is creating another object from the current object we are working with. So you might want to do this as time goes on. So this is how it is done. So at this point now, we want to talk about constructors in PHP. It is good we note that constructor is actually a method. So how do they work? What this method does is we create it within a class and we use it to initialize various properties. So this method is special in that any code in between this method executes immediately the class is instantiated. Fair enough? Or confusing? Alright, we'll get a clear understanding of this. But what does it look like? This is just what it looks like. You said it's a method, so it has to be preceded with the keyword function. Function is followed by two underscores and then construct. It doesn't change. This is the name of the method, construct. So within the parentheses after construct, you can specify some arguments you want to initialize. Then in between the curly braces, you can then specify some statements you want to just run or execute itself immediately the class is instantiated. So for example, we have this our class test created here. So I could just come somewhere here and say I want a function and I want this function to be a constructor. Remember, construct. Make sure you spell this correctly, and when you do, you will definitely know. So in between this braces, this parenthesis, you can specify some parameters. In this case, I am not specifying nothing. So after which we have our curly braces. In between the curly braces, any action you specify here, this is executed immediately the class is instantiated here. So in this case, for us to understand this, actually I'll just say echo this is a constructor. Fair enough. So this, I'll just save this, and at this point we have instantiated the class. Remember, what should always happen, or by default, once a method is created within a class, you need to actually use the object to access the method before whatever is within it will be executed. But this one is special because immediately we instantiate the class, everything within it will execute. Watch, as I refresh this, it says this is a constructor immediately. I didn't have to say use class point to construct and then this are called. Just this instantiation executes the actions inside the constructor method. Fairly simple, eh? Now there is something else we also call destructor. So what this destructor actually does is fairly simple. The destructor is also a method, and this method actually monitors an object closely and then performs an action once the script associated with the class that the object is referring to reaches its end. So if you want the code within a class to end once the object is done performing the action within the class, then you specify that code within the destructor method. So this is the format for the destructor method, preceded with the function keyword followed by two underscores and then destruct. Then you open and close the parenthesis, and within the curly braces you put in the statement you want your destructor method to actually execute to end the script associated with the class. So it looks something like this, but I am not writing any code here. So there could be plenty and plenty and plenty of actions in between here. So once the call to instantiate the class is finished doing what it has to do, any code you specify here will be executed. So for example, it could be you are creating a website that has to register an individual, for example, into the database of the website, and you open the database in between the constructs, and you want the database to close eventually or shut down once the object is done carrying out that action, then you specify the code to close the database inside the destruct. That's basically how it works. So object-oriented programming in PHP doesn't get any more easier. So I'll be waiting for you in the next video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.